Hello, and thank you for joining us here on our show, Awakening, on the WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. I'm Tina Huggins, and this is Joe Huggins, and our topic tonight is on abuse. But the tagline is, I didn't know it was abuse. So before we get started, we're going to go ahead and take a look at what Google has to say about the word abuse. Use something to bad effect or for a bad purpose. Misuse. Treat a person or an animal with cruelty or violence, especially regularly or repeatedly. And then Google has to say this about cruelty. Callous indifference to or pleasure in causing pain or suffering. Behavior that causes pain or suffering to a person or animal. Behavior which causes physical or mental harm to another, especially the spouse, whether intentionally or not. And then Google has this to say about suffering. The state of undergoing pain, distress, or hardship. So, Joe, what stood out to you about the definitions that I just read?
So the first thing that popped into my head was at the time I'm going to tell you the story, I was already out of the house, so I left because it was unsafe. It was a winter night that I'm going to tell you about a story. It was about 20 below wind chill factor, and we had an old dog, is 14 years old. Her name was Missy, great dog. And it was, just great family dog. And it was still at the household. So I called one of my kids that was still at the household, and I said, it's going to get 20 below tonight, so make sure Missy gets in the house. And the next day I called to see how Missy was doing, one of my kids, because I wasn't talking to my ex at that time. And they said, well, Mom wouldn't let me bring the dog in, so the dog froze to death. 14-year-old great dog froze to death. So that's one thing. That was horrible. So
yeah. So we obviously talk before we do these shows, and this was not one of the stories that he had talked about. So this is just kind of right here. We've talked about it before, but yeah.
Right. It's just another one.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's an abuse towards animals. And generally, if somebody is going to be abusive towards a person, usually you see that abuse even as children when there's a mental illness in the background, where they're mean to animals. And I know in your story that was not the only animal that your ex either killed or purposely
abused. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So those are kind of scary things. So in mine, when I was putting these together, of course, flashbacks from my marriage, and I'm not going to throw my ex under the bus as far as what took place. And as we go on, you'll kind of hear why. But I was thinking of all the things that took place in my relationship and in my family, in my home with my parents, things that I had no clue. Of course, I'm in the process of writing a book about abuse. And so I've had to research the abuses deeper than what I understood them as, so that I can get that information correct. And there's just so much information. I know in you, everything I've researched, your ex abused you, used that biblical, legal, all of those types of things to abuse you.
Right. The Bible, beat you up with the Bible. A lot of stories.
Yeah, you have tons of stories. That's why we actually started this. You can realize you're not alone in this world, and that there are people that are here that understand your story. And I didn't let you know in the beginning of this, I'm a certified divorce coach, and I'm a certified restorative family mediator. And doing those things, I belong into a domestic violence group where we mediate domestic violence situations in family disputes as they go through their divorce. So as we come through this, Joe, were there, talking about this earlier, were there things that went on that you never even knew was actually abuse?
I didn't know to the extent of what abuse I was under. I was too busy, I'm gonna say, covering up. Everything's fine, everything's good, or just don't talk about it. So there was a lot of that. Um, gosh, did I know? Deep down inside, I knew. Definitely. If I could be taken out of that environment, then I could be truthful with myself. But when you're in that environment and you're trying to survive, it's a whole different ballgame. And you lie to yourself. And you lie to your friends, and by not saying anything, that's, to me, that's a lie.
Mhm, mhm. And, I was in the same boat. I'm actually a 5th degree black belt, and I have actually fought in Europe, and I was one of the top fighters back when I was a teenager, back in like 84, like forever ago. So when things got violent for me, I never realized what was really going on. I ended up with a broken hand and separated ribs from a fight, and never ever saw that as abuse. Never saw that as abuse. It was just something that happened, and then that put in some gaslighting from my ex, where he said it was your fault. And what happened is he grabbed a hold of my hand, and yes, I was trained. So I released, and a door jamb was sitting right there, standing there, and I hit that door jamb and broke the back of my hand right here. And then right after that, he threw me down on the bed and stuck his knee in my chest. And he told me that I was being just crazy, that he wanted to protect me. That was the things that he said to me, and I believed it. I never even saw that as abuse. Several years later, when it got heated again, I was thrown from my vehicle. I had gone to leave the fight, and so I was in my vehicle, went to back up, and he jumped in front of my door and bent the door on my vehicle. So in order to protect myself and my vehicle, try to get out of the situation, I broke his nose. And this is the second time. The first time I actually punched him in the nose as well. And that ended up underneath a pickup truck. I crawled under there to keep him away from me. And I never saw that as abuse. That's a part where so many of you are in this type of relationship now, where you probably are not connecting the dots. You know that it shouldn't happen, but you don't see it as abuse. So give us an example, Joe, of a situation that you didn't know. I just kind of gave examples of things that you didn't know was abuse when it was going on.
Oh boy, so golly. I'm gonna say financial abuse. So that's just another facet what I went through. And I didn't realize until towards I'm gonna say, when I was exiting the house, I just thought, well, I don't have anything to lose. I'll just snoop through her office and see what I can find. Because before that, I was banned from looking around, of course. So I thought I had nothing to lose, so I might as well just go through the office. And I found a private account of hers, and she had $127,000 into it. And I called her on it. I said, "Hey, what's this?" And she goes, "Well, you knew about that." So that tells you right there, it doesn't do any good to confront them. They're gonna lie through their freaking teeth. Oh, you knew about that. Like it's nothing. $127,000 is nothing.
Yeah.
So that was one thing I didn't know I was being financially abused. So what really woke up, I was going to a counselor. And the counselor said, Joe, you should read this book, and it's called Stop Walking on Eggshells. And that was a great book. That opened my eyes big time. Because I didn't realize to the extent of her mental sickness until the counselor, she even picked out this counselor. And once the counselor got to know me, and she found out that he wasn't gonna reprimand me, because he confided in me later, and he just said, Joe, from what your wife said about you, we thought you were gonna be 6'2", which I'm not.
Definitely not.
Almost 6'2" wide, but but anyways, and he said, I thought you were gonna be 6'2", and every time that she opened her mouth, you were gonna backhand her. He said, that's how she portrayed you. And that's just the opposite,
Totally the opposite.
Yeah, so this is the counselor she handpicked. In fact, she handpicked probably 13 plus. I lost count after a while, because I went through 17 years of counseling, and over and over and over, a new counselor, and she'd pick a new one. And it just didn't go the way she thought it would go, so she'd just keep picking a new one, and we just keep going. And so anyways, this counselor, I think he saved my life, telling me to read Stop Walking on Eggshells.
Mm-hmm. So, and after I got with Joe, I read Stop Walking on Eggshells, and it was there's a lot of really great information. And so one of the things that you can do with that is you can Google Stop Walking on Eggshells, or get on Amazon and look it up, and then look below that, all the other books that are that other people have bought. It'll give you all kinds of ideas, because there's some wonderful books out there. New books that have hit the shelves. I've met some of those authors that are writing some really wonderful books right now to help you. There's so much information. It's just we don't know to look for it. And now that you're getting this opportunity to hear us talk, it's your opportunity to look for that.
Right, and my word of advice on that, if you're still in the household and you're reading a book like that, you better hide the book, because you're gonna pay dearly when they find out that you're trying to get help and you think that they are the bad person.
Yeah.
They're gonna get you.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
don't do it. Don't leave the book around.
And so that's a good suggestion. And I so often tell people, when you are in an abusive, it doesn't matter what kind of abuse it is. It can just be them being very silent and not talking to you for days. But the moment that you go to leave, things will escalate. That is how I got hurt each time. Okay, things would escalate. The first time that I remember, there's so much that my mind really blocked out. My oldest son would tell me stories right after I left their dad, and I had no clue. I had no clue that we fought as much as what my son told me. It was like every day, all the time, Mom, and I had no clue. So as I went through this, I realized that every time, like he said, hide the book. I had started through therapy prior to thinking I was going to get a divorce, years before. And I was just struggling. I didn't know it was my marriage. I didn't know that it was the screaming and yelling. And that's all it was for years, was the screaming and yelling and the control. He didn't like, I was a firefighter, I was an EMT, I was in high angle rescue, and he didn't like when I would leave to go and do those things. I taught martial arts and I would leave for weekends, and it didn't matter. When I got home, I'd be in trouble. So I went to this counselor, and during the time I was in counseling, she had me write down, and she said to write down like a letter or whatever, that's the most horrible things, exaggerate everything, get everything out. Well, I didn't hide that book. I don't know where it was, but he found it. And that was when the physical harm started happening. And it was at that very moment. And every time I would go to leave, talk about leaving, obviously write about leaving, what I just said, reading about fixing things, that's when things would get worse. So I can tell you the most dangerous time in any relationship is the moment that you go to leave. And mine was just leaving the fights. And his was just getting help, trying to understand things. So those are things, that's my advice, very important advice. So Google statistics say that there are 20,000 calls a day here in the US to the domestic violence hotline. 20,000, that is 20 people a minute that are calling the domestic hotline. And as you've just heard Joe and I talk, we didn't call the cops. We didn't notice the abuse, didn't think it was bad enough to call for help. So I could imagine that that number is doubled just based on those of us who never called. And
In my situation, I would guess it's 5 times more. You know, like 100,000 and what'd you say a day?
20,000.
20,000 a day, so I'd call it 100,000 a day. That don't call, because I never did. She was the one calling 911 saying I abused her, so.
She called,
It's just
and
the
then
opposite.
in my family, I have a relative that, his wives, there was 3 of them that called the cops. And they would call the cops on him and say that he was beating them. Apparently, you can take a certain kind of hose and you can smack your arm with it and it looks like somebody grabbed you. And if there's bruises, then that's more reason for them to press charges against you. And so we've got some other information, but before we go to complete this conversation, I want to take a break right now for our sponsors.
Hi, I'm John Thomas. I want to share with you a professional products and services directory we call Going Solo Directory. And you need to check this out. If you want exposure to your business or are seeking professional product or services, this directory has it all. And that membership, for the many special features, you get the benefit of a worldwide exposure with a 40-minute video interview on an international business show showcase. All this for just one low annual fee. For more information, contact goingsolodirectory.com.
Thank you and welcome back. So we're talking about the 20,000 calls a day, and I believe that this is why I said earlier that I don't want to throw my ex under the bus. I do believe he knew that some of the stuff he was doing was abusive, but I still have care or kind feelings towards him. I don't think that he's a bad person. He did bad things. He did bad things before I met him. There was a flag right there. So I do believe, and I know in my family that, in the outskirts of my family, that there was abuse, financial abuse, like Joe had mentioned earlier. And I do believe that some of these abusers don't even know that they're being abusive. Like, I'm most certain that this family member that abused his wife financially, like he was giving her a very small amount of cash to pay bills, and then he would take large amounts of money and go to the bar with it for, spend a couple of hundred in a night when she only had a couple of hundred for a month to cover bills. And so I do believe that had he understood that was being financially abusive, he wouldn't have done that. He wanted that control. He wanted control of money. He had a different viewpoint than maybe what she did on money, or maybe that's what he thought. And in my case, I do believe that he did know. I do believe that he was abusive with me on purpose, but not every time. And I do believe that, that he told himself things like you were saying about yourself earlier, that you lie to yourself. I believe he was lying to himself about my broken hand being my fault and the separated ribs being my fault and the dislocated leg when he threw me out of my van, that was my fault because I was going to leave and I shouldn't be driving the van out of there. He didn't ever want me to leave. And it was shortly after that incident, well, it was probably another 9 months or so ish, that I ended up leaving that relationship. It might have actually been a whole nother year. But I remembered, I saw that one as abusive. So I do believe that the abusers don't know. And the thing is like alcoholics. If you take an alcoholic to a dry out tank, you drop them off and you come back in the 2 months, 3 months, whatever they're in there for, they might stay sober for a few days. But after that, they're gonna drink because it wasn't their choice to get help. And in an alcoholic's case, all of them could probably recover if they made a choice. But in some cases with people who are abusive, the recovery is very difficult. Their brain, if they weren't born with this type of brain, and a lot of them are, but if they weren't born with that type of brain, they had some kind of abuse or situation that locked them into a specific place. And if you read Bill Eddy's books, he literally talks about how the blood flow from the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere is different with those people. And so figuring that stuff out and understanding that from my viewpoint helped me understand my clients in dealing with I explain this to my clients and it helps them to deal with their soon-to-be exes. They can't think the same way. So telling them that they're being abusive or telling them they're a narcissist or a sociopath, those types of things you should never do. Never do that. Because when you do that, they become enraged and things will escalate way worse than they were before.
Oh, yeah.
So that's back to my advice earlier. Don't tell them and don't tell them that you're leaving. Tell the people that are closest that you trust those types of things, but don't tell them. And then I suggest you find a divorce coach that understands this before you start the process, because a divorce coach that's trained can help you create an exit plan to get out of the home and to get out safely.
Right.
So Joe, once these people know that they're in an abusive home, you got to a point that you knew you were in an abusive home, and something happens, what would be your advice now? They know.
Okay, so abuse comes in many fashions. It could be physical, financial. So that's why you'd want to get a hold of Tina to figure out what level, because if it's physical, then yeah, absolutely get the heck out. If it's financial, that's a little different than physical. It's a lot different. So I would call for help and get a plan. I would,
Yeah.
And my plan was not that great. So after she attacked me one time and then the cops came and arrested her, she was out of the house. At that time I had it made. Well, I didn't have a good plan because later I dropped the charges, and then she moved back in, and then it was hell. So.
Yeah, and that is a pretty interesting story there. You were talking about it earlier. I believe that was the story in the freeze. Oh no, that was the dog story. So she had left, and you had another home that she could have lived in, but she chose to live in her car.
Right. Yeah. When you kind of understand the mental situation, they need to be the victim, no matter what. Even though they're the ones attacking you, in their mind, they're the victim. That's how twisted they are. So When she was on the outside of the house, I even offered to pay for another house for her to live in, you know. I didn't know it at the time. She had more money than I had. So she had access to 127,000, but decided to stay in her car because it makes a better story,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So,
And then she lost a bunch of weight, you said?
oh yeah, she is skinny as a pencil.
And so you actually thought she was dying, didn't you?
I'd say she was checking out.
And
Yeah.
so you were going to her rescue to keep that from happening.
Right, and I did. Yep, I fell for it. So if I would have talked to someone that had, education in it, I didn't know Tina at the time. So I didn't know.
And
So-
I didn't have the education at the time to be the help that you needed. I had
Right.
worked with people, but never in the situations that I ended up in and that you were in. So, yeah, again, just kind of reiterating, tell the people that are closest to you so that they're there. Because they're gonna be the ones that pick up the pieces when things are over. They're going to be the ones that maybe take you into their home or help make sure that you have money or whatever to help you go through the divorce. So make sure that they know things are going on. You can start off with small stories. I get it. I was there. I didn't want anybody to look poorly on me. And so what happened for me is that my family thought I left my husband for another man. It looked that way because I did. I moved out from my husband that very day and moved right in with another man. This other man was an AA, and that meant there was no drugs, no alcohol, nothing there. That I had had alcohol around me all my life, and I just needed that kind of break. I needed to be alcohol free on the outside of me. And had I told my family what was going on, they would have been there for me. But instead, they ended up taking my husband's side, and I had nobody. And it's taken years. There was 4 years later, my mom invited him over for Thanksgiving dinner, hoping that we'd patch things up. And she watched him take me down to the ground and put me in a chokehold in front of our children. Our youngest had to pull him off of me. I didn't fight back because it was in my mom's home. And I didn't want things to get broken. So my youngest son had to pull him off. That day, my mom stopped communicating with him. She said, "Honey, I never knew." And I said, "Well, there was a reason that I left him." Okay, so make sure that you tell people, and don't tell your soon-to-be ex, your spouse, your partner that you're leaving. Put an exit plan together, and it should be with somebody who can help you do that so it's done correct. And get out safely. If it's a domestic violence situation, the domestic violence hotline is 800-799-7233. That number again is 800-799-7233. My contact information is Coach Tina Lynn, CoachTinaLynn @gmail.com. My website is divorcecoachspecialist.com. And I'm on all the social medias, and Facebook is probably the best way to reach me, but you can personal message me. And on Facebook, I am under just my regular name, Tina Lynn Huggins, and you can find me under Tina or Divorce Coach Tina on the other platforms, and you can message me there. And it'd probably be easiest if you email me so that I know. And Huggins is spelled Huggins. So when you go to look, so that a lot of people will put Higgins and it's Huggins. So do you have any last statements?
Don't make excuses for being abused. So get help.
Yeah, Don't stay the victim. It's your time. It's time for you to be happy, healthy, and at peace with your life and everything around you.
Right.
Okay, so I want to thank you and I want to send you blessings, and please join us again next week.
Bye.